I often get asked how and why I started Inpulse, the employee engagement platform. Well, if I can take you back in time for a moment, it's 2005 and I decided it was time for me, having had a very short career in corporate life, it was time for me to move on. I was working for a very large global life insurance company, and whilst I had really enjoyed the experiences, I'd become head of communications there, I kind of felt it wasn't for me. And if I'm really honest with you, it's partly because I found corporate life jarred a little bit with some of my own values, certainly at that point in time. For example, I felt that it was important to give leaders feedback, but reverse mentoring wasn't in place in 2005, and so me giving my feedback to senior leaders was just seen as disrespectful or not welcome, shall we say. And so for me, I decided it was time to move on, and I had an amazing 7 years working as a performance coach, where I actually started working on myself because I recognized that maybe some of the ways that I had tried to give feedback to the leaders in my early 20s actually wasn't that helpful, and that may have been some of the reason it wasn't received. And so I really started to work on myself and coaching myself. Went through neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. For those of you who remember, I looked at the Tony Robbins work and went and did a lot of his material and courses. And then I started to get more and more opportunities to actually coach senior leaders and line managers. What was interesting was time and time again as we were coaching them, it became clear that the issues were often around not only how they managed themselves, but then how they managed others. And people began to talk more and more about engagement and how engaging is the leader. And we were really helping leaders and line managers work out, how do we be more engaging? How do we connect better with our people? And so that led me to setting up a consultancy. And on the consultancy, we wanted to look at three aspects. We wanted to look at leadership, we wanted to look at engagement, and we wanted to look at culture. And the reason for that is simple, that when you start talking about leadership, you have to talk about culture, the values, the behaviors. And if you're talking about engagement, you end up having to talk about leadership because it's such a critical part of engagement. So I'd come out of being a performance coach where I'd really started to see that some of the issues were about how leaders and line managers had the conversations, how they led their people. Then I set up a consultancy. It was very much working with very large corporate companies, again, global, as well as UK and European based. And we were looking at these three aspects of culture, engagement, and leadership. And along my journeys, I'd had opportunities to run surveys. I'd worked with some of the largest companies in the world. You'd know those names. They've been around for a long, long time. And in asking them, I paid hundreds of thousands of pounds to these organizations to ask these questions of our employees, waited months for the results to return. And when they did, they were often out of date or they were hard to interpret. It was always just paper-based. And I was like, this is crazy. This whole setup seems mad to me, that we're asking hundreds of questions only once a year. The results take ages to come back, and life's moved on. The other thing that was happening is I was doing a lot of traveling at this point in my life. I was going over to Europe and the United States a lot with work. And every time I would pass through the airport, some of you may recognize this yourself, you would come across those little buttons after you'd gone through security, and it would say, are you happy, sad, or mad? I'm not sure it was quite that, but that's kind of what it felt like. And you know, depending on how it had been, how the security guard and how the whole process had been, you would say, actually, I'm really excited because I went through really quickly. Bang, I'm happy. Or actually you'd say, you know what, that experience has really annoyed me because it took ages and they opened up all my bags and something got lost. So I'm going to say I'm angry or I'm sad. Anyway, why I tell that story is because as I was passing through, I was thinking, isn't this the kind of question we should be asking our employees? How do they feel about the experiences they're having? How do they feel about actually working for their organisation? But there were a couple of bits missing. The first bit that actually really annoyed me when I was at the airports was there was nowhere really to see the results, although that has begun to change. And so when I was pressing those buttons, I was thinking, well, I wonder what everyone else is thinking. Not because it was going to influence me, but just because it would have been interesting to see what others were thinking and where the whole kind of, if you like, hall were and all the people who were passing through security. The second thing was I couldn't actually do anything with the data. It couldn't affect or make any difference because no one asked me why. That seems so obvious, but they were asking me if I felt something, which is important, right? But no one said why. Because so what if they get hundreds of thousands of responses that say people feel happy? You don't know why. Or what if they get it that say they feel really sad? So what? You can't fix it because you don't know why. This was all going in. So I've got in my mind now that the old kind of traditional surveys are done, they're gone. Who wants to do a survey once a year? That seemed ridiculous. Life's much more dynamic than that. We need to know on a much more real-time basis what's going on. Also asking 50, 60 questions is just crazy. It makes no sense whatsoever. Number one, because no one wants to fill out 50 or 60 questions. Number two, the organization is never going to do anything with that amount of data. It's just complete data overload. And then number three, by the time you get the data back, it's often out of date because it's months later. So you take that and then you add to it this kind of fascination I had with the airport and the opportunity to share how I was feeling, and then finally add to it NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And so having become a practitioner, without doing disservice to NLP, what I had realized was that at the core of NLP is this, that how you feel drives your performance. Or put it another way, it drives how you behave. And how you feel is driven by what you focus on, the why. So in 2015, I was swimming at my local swimming place, and I remember just as I was swimming, I was thinking, hang on, I wonder if there's an opportunity to do something different here. I wonder if there's an opportunity to put together maybe some kind of survey that maybe just keeps it as simple as, how do you feel about working out? And why? And with those two key core questions, we could really help us drive performance, shift behavior, and change culture. So guess what? 2015, I set up Inpulse. And it's been a wild, amazing, crazy, phenomenal ride. But here we are, 6 years later, almost 400,000 employees around the world are on the platform. Dozens and dozens and dozens of global corporate companies working with, and we've made a real difference. This is the most important part to me. We've made a real difference in employees' lives, because part of the reason I did this was I actually wanted to make the employee experience much better, because I'd seen and I'd spent so much time coaching, going back to that part of my life, I'd spent so much time coaching leaders and line managers and teams that I'd seen like the impact that getting this wrong causes. I'd seen people going home, not just bitching and moaning about work at work, but the impact it had on their home life. And I was like, what if we could give data and insight to leaders and line managers that actually help them lead their people better, that could improve their experience and that they have at work. And so it's been a real privilege to go on that journey, to build a company that has been quite revolutionary in its approach to engagement, that's asked those questions every single time on every single survey. We start with those two questions. How do you feel about working out? Or how do you feel about your line manager? Or how do you feel about the recent experience you've had? And then why? Now that's important, and we will never ever change on that, because we think that is the secret sauce. That's the key to engagement. And you'll be pleased to know, of course, we recognize there's also some other key elements to engagement. There are certain indexes and indices that you want to make sure you're tracking, like leadership or culture, that we do. And we do some of those things that you'd expect us to do when it comes to engagement. And we typically ask around 12 to 18 questions. And we typically ask corporates to do it on about a quarterly basis. And the reason for the quarterly is actually things do change each quarter. About every 2 to 3 months, things do change. And life moves on, and the culture expands and grows, and external events happen. And so actually measuring it on that kind of basis is a good time to see the changes. It also is a good rhythm and cadence for managers to be able to do something with the data and the insights. So they get our dashboards, they can see the data, they can see how their people feel, and they can go and have a conversation with them about engagement, about how they're feeling, about what's going on. And it's fantastic. It's so good to see them using this data, because it's so different from our people feel 0.36% more engaged Oh, we've moved the dial 2%, or we've gone up 1 percentage point on this. Well, what does that mean? How's that a human conversation? What's so much more powerful is when actually they're saying, hey, I can see that 40% of you feel anxious, and it's because of your workload, or it's because of job security, or it's because of your well-being. Because we've got the themes, we've got the reasons why they feel the way they do. It's been an amazing journey. It's been a roller coaster. It's been fantastic. It has been such a thrill to be part of this organization and lead it now to where there's 25 of us in the organization, where we're, as we say, working with just some amazing brands. But most importantly, most critically, we're making a difference in the organizations we're working with. We've changed the nature of the conversation. We've changed the nature of engagement.